East Asia Tonight.
A very good evening. I'm Jill Newbrunner, and here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. Japan and Vietnam pledge to boost trade and security cooperation with the Japanese leader Shigeru Ishiba in Hanoi on the first leg of a two-nation trip to Southeast Asia. China reaffirms its commitment and capability to achieve economic growth of about 5% this year, even as analysts warn of a sharp downturn in the face of U.S. tariffs. A report tracking military expenditure says budgets in East Asia ballooned in 2024 at the fastest pace in 15 years, while global spending hit a record. Russia thanks North Korea for coming to its aid as Pyongyang confirms its participation in the Ukraine war for the first time. South Korea calls it an admission of a criminal act. A South Korean high school student injures several people in a stabbing incident. Police intend to book him on suspicion of attempted murder. Also ahead, we delve into the 40th edition of Exercise Balikatan, or Shoulder to Shoulder, annual joint military drills between the U.S. and the Philippines. It's the largest ever, with Japan also joining as a full-fledged contributor for the first time. Trade and issues top the agenda in the meeting between the leaders of Japan and Vietnam. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is on his first trip to Vietnam since taking office. It's also his first high-level discussions in the region. In a joint conference with Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh, Mr. Ishiba says both countries remain committed to a free and open international trade order. Mr. Chin, too, affirmed the need to uphold international rules, adding that the two leaders signed 4 agreements covering green tech and semiconductor research. Vietnam is a major assembling hub for big Japanese firms such as Honda and Canon. Now, these manufacturers invest more than $70 billion into the Southeast Asian country, with Japanese banks, too, holding stakes in top Vietnamese lenders. Well, the White House has imposed reciprocal tariffs of 24% on Japanese imports and 46% on Vietnamese goods. Though temporarily halted, both countries are still subject to a 10% baseline levy, as well as 25% on auto imports to the U.S. Now, the two nations in recent weeks attempted to shore up ties with key trading partners. Tokyo held a trilateral meeting with China and South Korea to promote regional and global trade. Vietnam hosted Chinese President Xi Jinping during the leaders' tour of the region. Well, let's get more from CNA's Michio Ishida. She is standing by in Tokyo. Michio, first of all, Mr. Ishiba's trip comes on the heels of Mr. Xi Jinping, or President Xi Jinping's trip, and that was where he looked for cooperation caused by U.S. tariffs. Now, how did this factor into Mr. Ishiba's visit?
Well, certainly U.S. tariffs is high on Prime Minister Ishiba's Southeast Asian trip. He noted the possible impact on Vietnam. Now, there are close to 2,500 Japanese firms operating in Vietnam, so they will be impacted too. And by hearing the views of those businesses and Vietnamese leaders, Mr. Ishiba expressed his wish to reflect them in his policy towards the United States. Now, Japan and Vietnam in a joint statement agreed to upgrade economic relations and support Vietnam's ambition of increasing its workers, and particularly in the semiconductor sector. Now, Japan will support training from high school level to research institutes, accept 500 PhD students in its science program on semiconductors. They also agreed cooperation in green transformation, energy, disaster risk reduction, regional revitalization. Now, as of 2024, 600,000 Vietnamese reside in Japan. as technical workers and trainees, making up for a labor shortage in Japan. And Japan aims to facilitate visa issuance system. As to security, now Vietnam accepted Japan's official security assistance, which is a security cooperation framework Japan launched in December 2022, is to help countries strengthen security and deterrence capabilities. It's widely known that Vietnam is in dispute with China in the South China Sea. And Japan and Vietnam have also agreed this time on a 2+2 or foreign and defense vice ministerial level dialogue, with the first meeting to be held in Japan this year.
You talked about security. Defense likely to be a priority as Mr. Ishiba heads to the Philippines next. What does he want to come away with?
Well, Mr. Ishiba places importance on realizing a free and open Indo-Pacific, and for that, the role of ASEAN is vital. And he mentioned on Sunday, referring to China's attempt to change the status quo by force, the relevance of strengthening security cooperation with the region. Now, Japan has already offered official security assistance to the Philippines with air surveillance radars, equipments to monitor vessels. Further transfer of defense equipment and technical cooperation is expected on the back of stepped-up coordination between Philippines armed forces and maritime agencies. Now, there's the Japan-U.S.-Philippines trilateral security framework, which is hoped to remain under the Trump administration. Mr. Ishiba is expected to visit the Philippines Coast Guard and his maritime self-defense forces, making a port call at this time when he's in Manila. Also vital for Mr. Ishiba is to build personal relationship with Mr. Marcos and other ASEAN leaders. It's his third visit to the region since taking office last October. He places importance on face-to-face meeting to build on the existing trust. Now, based on a survey this January to February by Singapore's think tank, ASEAN has ranked Japan the most trusted country, and Japan would like to keep that rank.
Indeed. Well, thanks for that. CNA's Michio Ishida with that live update from Tokyo. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute has revealed a record surge in global military spending last year, driven by heightened geopolitical tensions and ongoing conflicts. The conflict think tank, also known as SIPRI, says military expenditure reached $2.72 trillion in 2024. Now, that's an increase of nearly 10% from 2023, marking the sharpest rise since the Cold War. Now, SIPRI says more than 100 countries raised their military budgets, with significant increases in Europe and the Middle East. A SIPRI researcher says the rise is likely to have a profound socio-economic and political impact, with the governments forced to make trade-offs in budgetary decisions. Now, in East Asia, SIPRI says spending has jumped nearly 8% to more than $430 billion last year, as tensions meant countries had to keep up with their war-fighting capabilities. This marks the largest jump since 2009, with East Asia making up nearly 70% of nearly $630 billion spent for Asia and Oceania combined. Over to China, which has the world's second largest military expenditure after the US. They spent more than $310 billion last year. That's a 7% increase from 2023. SIPRI says the massive spending is driven by Beijing's desire to modernize its military across all domains by 2035. This build-up, along with geopolitical tensions, is seen to have prompted neighboring Japan to do the same. Tokyo budgeted some $55 billion for its defense last year, a staggering jump of 21% more than 2023, and is the largest annual increase since 1952 to focus on long-range strike capabilities and air defense systems. It was more of a modest increase for both South Korea and Taiwan. Spending went up by 1.4% and 1.8%, respectively. Russian President Vladimir Putin has thanked North Korean leader Kim Jong-un for the role of his country's soldiers in helping drive Ukrainian forces out of Russia's Kursk region. The Kremlin, in a statement, expressed deep appreciation for Pyongyang, which it said had acted from a sense of solidarity, justice and comradeship for Moscow. This comes as Russia claims to have retaken the final village in the Kursk region over the weekend, and that territory had been under Ukrainian control. Meanwhile, North Korea has confirmed for the first time that it had sent troops to fight for Russia in the war. And Kim Jong-un had ordered a monument to honor the fallen soldiers, seemingly confirming that North Korean troops were killed in combat. Now, the admission comes just days after Russia hailed the North's participation in the war, which had been reported by South Korean and Western intelligence for months. Kyiv claims that several hundred North Korean troops have been killed or wounded, with estimates suggesting that at least 10,000 troops were sent by Pyongyang to support Russia. South Korea says that the North's confirmation is an admission of a criminal act.
북한군이 우크라이나 전쟁에 가담한 것은 유엔 헌장과 안보리 결의를 위반한 명백한 불법적 행위입니다. 이를 공식 인정했다는 것도 스스로 범죄 행위를 자인한 것입니다. 이에 우리 군은 국제사회와 함께 비인도적이고 불법적인 행위를 강력히 규탄합니다.
The U.S. has responded with concern and said that Pyongyang's military deployment for Russia must end, adding that third countries like North Korea must bear responsibility for the war. A war of words as China and the Philippines trade accusations over a disputed reef in the South China Sea. Beijing has slammed Manila for what it calls provocation around the sandbank and said Chinese activities there were aimed at countering, quote, illegal Philippine activity. The tiny sandbank named Sandy Cay is part of the contested Spratly Islands and lies near Philippine-held Titu Island. China calls it Tie Sien Jiao, while it's known as Pag-asa Cays in the Philippines. The Chinese Coast Guard reported that they have dealt with an incident yesterday accusing 6 Filipinos of illegally landing on the disputed reef and called on Manila to stop infringing on its territorial sovereignty. The Philippines, however, has denied Chinese news reports claiming that Beijing seized control of the reef, adding that a Philippine team visited the sandbank yesterday and found nobody there. Manila also urged Beijing to act with restraint in disputed waters.
There is no truth whatsoever to the claim of the Chinese Coast Guard that the Pag-asa case has been seized. No? The facts on the ground do not support this statement coming from the Chinese Coast Guard.
Manila has asserted its claims over Sandy Cay, with its national task force releasing a picture of officials holding the national flag on the sandbank there. And the Philippine task force also reminding Beijing of their commitment to a 2002 declaration, which states that there will be no occupation moving forward of unoccupied features. China's state media last week released pictures of Chinese officials posing with the national flag on the reef's white surface and emphasized that the country's Coast Guard had implemented maritime control over the sandbank. Now, there have been no other signs that Beijing has permanently occupied the reef. Beijing and Manila have been trading blame recently over the ecological impact of land reclamation and military activities in the South China Sea. China has urged India and Pakistan to exercise restraint following an exchange of gunfire between the two sides along the line of control for the 4th night in a row. This follows a deadly terror attack in Kashmir last week, which New Delhi blames Islamabad for the shooting, which killed 26 civilians. Pakistan has denied any involvement. Beijing said it hopes the two sides can handle their differences through dialogue and consultation, and adds that it welcomes measures that can help cool the situation. India, meanwhile, says it has responded to, quote, unprovoked gunfire from several Pakistan army posts along the de facto border separating both sides' area of Kashmir. Delhi accused Islamabad of violating the ceasefire agreement. Pakistan has not commented on the matter. India's defence forces have conducted several military exercises across the country since the attack, including a test fire of anti-ship missiles, which observers see as a show of strength. The Navy says its ships undertook successful multiple firings and said the tests were part of exercises to validate the readiness of its systems and crew for long-range precision strikes. Last week's attack had India and Pakistan triggering a slew of measures against each other. India swiftly downgraded ties and imposed several measures, including the revocation of visas for almost all Pakistanis. Hundreds of Pakistani nationals have left India in the past few days. India has also closed its main land border with Pakistan and suspended a water-sharing treaty. In response, Islamabad ordered the expulsion of Indian diplomats and military advisors, cancelled visas for Indian nationals, and barred its airspace to Indian airplanes. Meanwhile, Indian police officials say security forces are, quote, very close to locating the Pahalgam attackers. The police have detained some 500 people in Kashmir for questioning after searching nearly 1,000 houses for the militants. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has vowed to seek justice for the victims, calling the attack a conspiracy. He says terrorists and their supporters aim to destroy Kashmir again. Coming up on East Asia Tonight, some Indian exporters could get a boost as China-based firms ask them to fulfill American orders, given the eye-watering U.S. tariffs for many Chinese goods. An IPO momentum in Hong Kong gathers pace as listing opportunities elsewhere become scarce amid the trade war. Welcome back as we get your business news next. And Henry Yin joins us for that. Now, Henry, you've got some information about why Chinese policymakers are downplaying the growth risks that are stemming from the trade war.
Yes, indeed, Joe. We are seeing economists at institutions, including UBS, Goldman Sachs and Citigroup, have lowered their forecast for China's 2025 growth in recent weeks to around 4% or lower. But Chinese policymakers say they're, quote, fully confident of hitting an annual economic growth target of about 5%. The assurance contrasts with a general analyst's consensus that hefty U.S. levies raise the risk of a sharp downturn. The country's state planner sought to allay those concerns.
不管国际局势如何变化，我们将锚定发展目标，保持战略定力，集中精力办好自己的事。我们对实现今年经济社会发展目标任务，我们充满信心。
China has rolled out a slew of new measures to defend growth, but stopped short of announcing additional deficit spending. The measures cover 5 main areas: supporting employment, stabilizing foreign trade, promoting consumption, expanding investment, and creating a favorable business environment. China hopes to encourage the export of services products, expand domestic consumption, and revive its property market to offset any impact from the tariff war. China's economy had a strong start of the year, mainly due to export front-loading and government subsidies for home appliances and business equipment. But growth is expected to slow sharply from the second quarter as exorbitant U.S. tariffs kick in. Beijing reiterates that it has ample policy tools and room for further adjustment. In the same news conference, China's central bank says it will continue to implement a moderately loose monetary policy and secure the yuan's stability. The comment comes as traders are betting that Beijing may devalue the yuan to help its exports gain an advantage amid rising tensions with the U.S. The central bank also sees limited impact from U.S. bond market volatility on China's forex assets. While the lack of more monetary and fiscal stimulus disappointed investors, with stocks trading fairly muted in China. Benchmark indices in Shanghai and Shenzhen closed lower, while the Chinese yuan also lower against the US dollar. We're also tracking market moves in Hong Kong. The Hang Seng closed below the flat line. Also on our radar are e-commerce stocks. They traded mixed just days after fast fashion firm Shein hiked its US prices 377% ahead of incoming tariff increases and the closure of the de minimis loophole set for Friday. While unusual partnerships being forged to navigate US-China trade war, some China-based firms have reportedly sought help from Indian exporters to fill orders on their behalf and help them retain their American customers. Bloomberg reports several Indian firms at the Canton Fair in Guangzhou were approached by local enterprises to supply goods under the brands of the Chinese firms or co-branded with the Indian firms. In return, the Indian firms would pay a commission to the Chinese businesses. Most Chinese exports to the US have been slapped with taxes as high as 145%. In comparison, taxes on Indian imports stand at 10% currently. They could be raised to 26% in July if New Delhi isn't able to cut a trade deal with Washington. Chinese firms' move comes as India maintains restrictions on Chinese investment and making it difficult for firms to set up operations in the country or ship goods through. And experts say Indian exporters may see more orders diverted their way, especially in sectors like hand tools, electronics, and home appliances, as the US and China remain at loggerheads over tariffs. Well, Chinese fintech firm Ant Group is making a foray into the brokerage business. It's buying up Hong Kong-based Bright Smart Securities and Commodities Group. And Ant is buying a controlling stake of a little more than half the shares in the securities firm and is paying about $362 million for the share. The Ant Group operates a widely used payments app, Alipay, and remains a third owned by e-commerce giant Alibaba. Shares of Bright Smart have soared to a record high after news of the deal and finishing about 80% higher. And that's as the brokerage will need to make an unconditional cash offer for all the issued shares. And shares of Japanese car maker supplier Toyota Industries rose by their daily limit of 23%, marking the stock's biggest one-day jump in at least 4 decades. Toyota Motor shares also rose as much as 4%. And the surge comes after Toyota Motors chairman Akio Toyoda and his founding family proposed to buy out the company in a record $42 billion deal. And Toyota Industries has denied receiving the buyout offer from the chairman or the Toyota Group. But the supplier confirmed receiving proposals about going private through what it calls a special purpose company. Experts say the deal, which would represent one of the biggest buyouts in the world, comes against the backdrop of increasing pressure from investors in Japan for stronger corporate governance and better returns. A growing number of Chinese mainland companies are gearing up to list in Hong Kong as US-China trade tensions slowed offerings elsewhere. 2 mainland companies filed for their IPOs in the city today. And for green energy battery maker Hainan Drinda, it would be its secondary listing after its Shenzhen IPO. It's looking to raise up to $234 million in Hong Kong by selling 64.4 million shares. Separately, fruit tea maker Auntie Jenny also filed for its IPO to raise up to $35 million. It'll be the third mainland tea drink maker to debut in Hong Kong this year, following the share sales of Mixue and Guming in the city. Another tea firm, Chargi, raised more than $411 million with a Nasdaq listing in New York this month. Meanwhile, more IPOs are in the pipeline. Exchange filings show that tech firms such as Novosense Microelectronics and Fibercom Wireless are looking to list in Hong Kong. KPMG figures show that Hong Kong's IPO market has had a strong start this year, raising about $2.3 billion across 15 stock debuts in the first quarter. That's 3 times more than in the same period of last year, marking its best performing quarter since 2021. And that's all for business. Jill, back to you.
Appreciate that, Henry. Thanks so much. Coming up on East Asia tonight, the U.S. and the Philippines focusing on a so-called full battle test as part of their Balikatan annual joint military exercises. And Japan's officially joining as a participant for the first time. We'll speak to an expert to find out what the increased level of collaboration could mean for the region. This is East Asia Tonight. Here are the headlines we're following. Japan and Vietnam pledged to boost trade and security cooperation with the Japanese leader Shigeru Ishiba in Hanoi on the first leg of a two-nation trip to Southeast Asia. Security among issues discussed, with the leaders exchanging views on North Korea's nuclear and missile development. Russia thanks North Korea for coming to its aid as Pyongyang confirms its participation in the Ukraine war for the first time. South Korea calls it an admission of a criminal act. And a report says military expenditure in East Asia rose in 2024 at the fastest pace in 15 years, while global spending saw a record surge. So, more than 14,000 American and Philippine troops are taking part in this year's Exercise Balikatan, or Tagalog for shoulder to shoulder. The drills aim to boost joint capabilities in responding to regional security concerns. Now, they cover a range of scenarios, including maritime security, missile strikes, and cyber warfare. For the first time, an American air defense system designed to take down drones was tested in the Philippines. Beijing has criticized the drills as provocative, although the U.S. and the Philippines have denied that they were aimed at China. The three-week exercise also involves troops from Australia and Japan, with Tokyo expected to soon ratify a landmark reciprocal access agreement with Manila. Now, this will allow troops from both sides to operate in each other's territories. Let's get more insights. We're joined by Lucio Blanco Pitlo III. Now, he is president of the Philippine Association for Chinese Studies, also a research fellow at the Asia-Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation. Welcome, sir. I want to talk to you first about the exercise, which includes, for the first time, Japan. Now, it appears that Manila is cultivating somewhat of an expanded military ties with Japan. What is the strategy behind that, and how does Japan fit into that strategy?
Yeah, thank you. Certainly, we see deepening of security relations between the Philippines and Japan. I think this is part of Manila's broader efforts to expand its pool of security partners. I think this will be very helpful in terms of future-proofing the country's security, bringing in more partners and allies that can help modernize and upgrade the capacity of the Philippines, especially on the maritime front. We have seen Japan stepping up in terms of providing support to the Philippine capacity buildup for its Coast Guard, and increasingly also in the military. And so I think these relations is bound to deepen with the passage of time.
All right, talk to us also about the type of advanced weaponry and the concepts that you've observed being deployed at this year's exercise, and what it's signaling to China in particular.
Well, certainly in the past years, we have seen the Balikatan exercises becoming bigger in terms of troops being deployed by both sides, and also in terms of the number of observers and participants. This year, Japan will debut as a full-fledged participant to this initially a bilateral exercise, but it has evolved. And we have also seen an increasing number of arms that are being deployed, sophisticated and very modern. And so last year, we have the deployment of the Typhoon missile, whose range can go beyond parts of the West Philippine Sea and may include parts of Taiwan and even mainland China. And this year, we have seen, of course, the deployment of the Nemesis missile, which may be shorter in terms of range, but can play a very important role, especially on the maritime domain.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, the U.S. has said that the exercise builds bonds very quickly against shared adversity, and I assume they're referring to China without saying as much. Now, what do you think are the signals being sent to China, and how may China respond to the exercise?
Well, the Philippines and the U.S. is trying to re-energize the defense alliance, and I think this is very important because there have been concerns about the reliability of the U.S. given the Trump 2.0, the unpredictability in terms of foreign policy. So I think this is very important in terms of signaling to allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific, notably the Philippines being one of the weakest in terms of the network of U.S. alliances in this part of the world. So strengthening the Philippines' defense posture in areas where it is traditionally weak, including in the north facing Taiwan and in the west facing the South China Sea. These are all very important for the Philippines. And for the U.S., it's very important to send a strong message to its allies and partners that it is willing and able, and that regardless of the change of the leadership in the White House, that commitment remains. And of course, the message to China that the alliance is here to try to deter actions that would upset the status quo, whether in the South China Sea or in the Taiwan Strait. And so I think this exercises, the types of activities and the types of equipment and the drills that would be employed are all part of this bigger, broader communication strategy to send a message to allies and partners in the region as well as to China.
So indeed, as you said, the message is to re-energize the relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines. But despite their unity and their show of strength, they are still saying that their message is that they are ready for war, but they don't want a war. But, you see the tensions in the South China Sea. What do you think now is needed to, somewhat calm the tensions and the relations down with China?
Agree. So the alliance is broadly making a case that it's there, it remains, it stays relevant, and that it makes necessary improvements as both allies are seeing a change in the security and risk landscape. But at the same time, I think it's very important that the security dialogue, security talks, especially between the Philippines and China, as well as between US and China, will be institutionalized, and more of such mechanisms would be strengthened. And at the same time, the crisis management mechanism also has to be improved, because more assets, more exercises of this also runs the risk of misunderstanding and miscalculation, because we are seeing PLA's capability is growing, and it's also demonstrating its presence in these flashpoints. And so it's becoming an uninvited observer in these exercises, trying to see what's going on from a distance. But of course, the risk of accidents is there. So it's very important that all parties will be able to establish lines of communication, and at the same time practice crisis management to
Absolutely.
avoid unintended encounters.
Now, very quickly, this exercise Balikatan is focusing on what we call a full battle test, isn't it, between the two allies? Now, it also comes on the back of a record surge in global military spending last year, according to one survey. And Japan was right after China in that increased military spending. What does this increased spending mean for the region? Are we perhaps looking to an arms race in the future?
Well, there's that concern that the spending in the defense might send mixed messages and potentially trigger an arms race. We see Japan becoming the world's third largest spender for defense, and also the capacity and the will, the desire on the part of Tokyo to expand its security engagement, including with countries in the region, and looking at the potential shared interests, whether in the East China Sea or the South China Sea. And so I think this is where the importance of this iteration of the Balikatan in terms of having Japan as a signal, a message that it's increasing its security footprint in the region.
Okay, we leave it there for now, but we do appreciate your input. Lucio Blanco Pitlo III speaking to us from Manila there. Myanmar marks 1 month since the deadly earthquakes, and recovery efforts are still underway amid logistical challenges. The disaster has claimed more than 3,500 lives and injured some 5,000 others, and more than 100 people still missing. The 7.7 magnitude quake has impacted 28 million people across 6 regions, including the capital, Naypyidaw. Thousands are still homeless as the monsoon season nears. Living conditions are dire and aid is urgently needed. The WHO has raised concerns over the risk of cholera and other diseases in the worst-hit areas as survivors remain in makeshift shelters. There is extensive damage to infrastructure. Local media reports say nearly 64,000 houses, 7,000 schools, more than 5,000 pagodas and temples, hundreds of dams and bridges have been destroyed. In Mandalay and nearby regions, roads and power lines have been destroyed, making relief efforts even more challenging. Historic buildings also bore the brunt. Iconic pagodas, monasteries and Buddha idols were destroyed, and more than 3,000 religious structures lost. Notably, the Nagayon Pagoda in Mandalay, home to a centuries-old sacred serpent carving, was reduced to rubble. A team of 30 Chinese experts in Myanmar. They are in Myanmar to assess the damage. Their findings include significant damage to buildings such as the Children's Hospital in Naypyidaw, where the earthquake fault line ran directly beneath, causing severe structural damage. Despite a declared ceasefire earlier this month to aid relief efforts, Myanmar's military government is reported to be continuing its air raids against rebel groups. A report by the Myanmar Witness Project documented 80 airstrikes across multiple regions. The exiled Opposition National Unity Government, or NUG, says more than 200 civilians, including children, have been reportedly killed in the bombings since the quake. In other news, a student in South Korea has attacked several people at a local high school with a weapon. Yonhap News reports that at least 6 people, including the principal, have been injured. Officials say the stabbing took place around 8:40 a.m. local time in Cheongju City, some 110 kilometers south of the capital, Seoul. Officials say the victim suffered minor to serious injuries to their chest, abdomen and other areas, and they are being treated at a hospital. None are in critical condition. The suspect reportedly jumped into a nearby reservoir after the attack, but was apprehended and transferred to a hospital. An investigation into the incident is underway. Police plan to book him on suspicion of attempted murder. Coming up, we turn our focus to Italy. Thousands in line to visit Pope Francis's tomb in Rome, a day after his historic funeral. Thousands of faithful have waited in line to visit the tomb of Pope Francis after the Basilica of St. Mary Major in Rome opened to the public. The pontiff was laid to rest at the Basilica over the weekend after his coffin was driven through the streets of Rome on the Pope Mobile. The 88-year-old broke with tradition in his choice of tomb site, becoming the first pope in more than a century to be buried outside the Vatican. A single white rose was placed on the tomb that had his name in Latin, Franciscus, inscribed on the top, while a reproduction of the late pontiff's cross hung above the white marble slab. Among the crowd of mourners were cardinals paying their respects to the late Pope Francis. The Pope's passing sets in motion an elaborate process to select his successor. 135 cardinals under the age of 80 will assemble for a meeting known as a conclave to elect the new pontiff. No date has been set for the conclave, but it must start by the 10th of May. The cardinals from the Philippines, home to one of the largest Catholic populations in the world, are expected to be among those gathered for the papal conclave. CNA's Berna Bernal explains how one of them could also become the next pope.
The Manila Cathedral's church bells ring for the eternal repose of the late Pope Francis, the first Latin American to shepherd a flock of over 1 billion Catholics worldwide. He departed from the conservatism of his predecessors. He wrote apostolic letters on social issues like human trafficking and climate change, always extending the Church's embrace to the world's most vulnerable. A perspective shared by Filipino Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. He is among those eligible to vote and be voted as the next pope. Often referred to as the Asian Francis, Cardinal Tagle was educated in Jesuit-run institutions in the Philippines known for their pursuit of social justice. He also headed a Catholic-based social action organization. When I covered Pope Francis's visit to the Philippines in 2015, the Cardinal was often seen right behind the Argentine pontiff on his Pope Mobile, beaming with joy. But there are other eligible Filipino members of the College of Cardinals. Archbishop of Manila,
Pope Francis showed us what it means to suffer with others and find hope in the midst of pain.
The third Filipino cardinal eligible is the Bishop of Caloocan, Cardinal Pablo Virgilio David. He has underscored Pope Francis's role as a bridge builder. He says the Pope taught the world that the heart of the gospel beats most strongly where poverty and exclusion dwell. As the College of Cardinals prepares for the secretive process of choosing a successor who could either continue or reverse his legacy half a world away, Filipino Catholics like Conchita Mill mourn his passing.
Naging malaking bahagi siya sa buhay pananampalataya. Hindi ko talaga ng isang salita na talagang sa akin napakabigat.
Southeast Asia's most typhoon-prone country will best remember Pope Francis exhorting survivors of one of the strongest tropical cyclones to ever hit land to hold on to their faith, addressing them under the rain right at the epicenter of Typhoon Haiyan.
As a reformist, Pope Francis commanded respect from people across a spectrum of spiritual beliefs. He often highlighted the role of the Church in caring for the wounded, so to speak. The next pontiff will have big shoes to fill, and we won't know until next month at the earliest if the first ever Asian Pope will be named to lead Catholics worldwide. Buena Bernal, CNA, Manila.
Lego has opened its first factory in Vietnam, one that will cater to consumers in Asia and not export to the U.S. The Danish toy maker says its billion-dollar plant is also part of the company's global push to cut emissions and Vietnam's ambition to lead in sustainable manufacturing. The factory is slated to run entirely on clean energy by next year.
A pair of giant Lego figures in traditional Vietnamese outfits welcomed guests to the opening of Lego's newest factory. It's packed with high-tech machines and robots. Together, they churn out colorful bricks with incredible precision. But it's more than a big investment in Southeast Asia. This plant is also a bold step towards a cleaner future.
We serve creative people and we serve kids all over the world, and we just want to make sure that the planet that the children inherit when they grow up needs to be a planet that's still there, that's still functional.
That message is central to Lego's bigger climate mission. The Danish toy maker wants to stop adding greenhouse gases into the atmosphere by 2050. It's aiming for a 37% cut in emissions by 2032. For now, Lego still makes its bricks using oil-based plastic, but it's investing into finding greener alternatives. Last year, a third of its materials came from renewable or recycled sources. Vietnam is also trying to position itself as an eco-friendly place and hit net zero by 2050.
Lego and Vietnam, we are having the same aspirations. We both want to be green. To play our part in the climate. And I think this with the solar and battery and DPPA is showcasing that it can be done.
12,000 solar panels line the rooftops powering the site. A battery system stores what's needed for when the sun isn't out. It keeps the factory running around the clock. This is all part of Vietnam's new direct power purchase agreement. The scheme allows big companies to buy renewable energy straight from solar and wind producers. Still, clean energy is only part of the story. Legos also focus on greener operations, literally. The site has planted 50,000 trees. That's twice the number cleared to build the facility. And it's the first Lego plant to swap out single-use plastic bags for paper ones. To support faster delivery across the region, the company is also opening a new distribution hub to serve markets from Australia to across Southeast Asia. The company is now bracing itself for turbulent economic times.
You can say the vulnerability or the volatility that happens in the world right now, of course, keeps us on our toes, and that's for sure. But it's the fact that we are regional in our setup means that we're not that dependent on kind of tariffs from far away into countries. So that has kept me. That was my point. That kept me less alive, and then I was asked what kept me alive or awake was really the fact that we need to stay relevant. That the Lego brand needs to be relevant all over the world, and part of being very relevant in this part of the world.
For Lego, its focus goes far beyond filling orders. It wants to prove that even massive factories can be sustainable and stay profitable.
They're creating a blueprint piece by piece of how a company on the scale of Lego can make sure that they have businesses and manufacturing centers that operate at net zero and support workers and work well, collaborate with local communities and work well within countries like Vietnam.
A factory built for toys, but one that might just help build a greener future brick by brick.
Now let's check some headlines from media outlets in East Asia. The Asahi Shimbun says the robotic arm designed to collect samples from Japan's crippled Fukushima power plant is unclear. It reportedly struggles to retrieve melted fuel debris after numerous trials. It has undergone 6 years of development and has already cost taxpayers more than $50 million. In South Korea, Yonhap News Agency says acting President Han Duck-soo is likely to resign and declare his bid for the upcoming presidential election later this week. Mr. Han is seen as a strong contender among conservatives to challenge LDP presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung. Xinhua report says China is expected to see a cross-border travel boom during the May Day holiday. It projects a 27% jump from last year, or an average of more than 2 million crossings each day between the 1st and 5th of May. Well, before we go, over the weekend in Japan, parents and babies gathered at Tokyo's Sensoji, a temple that has been performing an age-old tradition known as Naki Sumo, or crying sumo. Well, you see it there. Babies were gently lifted up in the air by sumo wrestlers as they are encouraged to cry in the belief that a strong cry signals good health, and it can also help ward off evil spirits.
やっぱり泣いて元気に育つっていう昔からの言葉があるので、それに従っていっぱい泣いてほしかったんですけど、この子はあまり泣きませんでした。
It was a celebratory atmosphere, with attendees seeing it as a rite of passage and also a unique moment to look back on years down the road.
高いされた時すごい泣いてたね。
怖かった。多分大きいお兄さんに高いされて
泣いてました。
The Naki Sumo tradition has its roots in Shinto practices and attitudes that aimed at protecting the young. Shinto is the indigenous faith originating in Japan and predates historical records. Organizers say a total of 160 babies, accompanied by their parents, took part in this year's event. You've been watching East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, also on Facebook, and check out YouTube as well. Bye-bye.